You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome to McGuire Mondays here on the Toronto Sports Rush channel, brought to you by the Bet Rivers Network. My name is Kyle Andrew, and I am, of course, joined today by Pierre McGuire. Pierre, it appears as though Matthew Knies, at 22 years old, is a Toronto Maple Leaf for at least the next 6 years. How should Leafs fans feel about it?
Really excited. Obviously, the chemistry he has with Austin Matthews was really special last year, almost getting 30 goals, 29. And I think the biggest thing, Kyle, when you look at it, obviously they're not going to have Mitchell Marner, so they're going to have to find somebody to play on the other side. But I think the chemistry with Knies and Matthews in particular was really strong, and we also saw how effective Matthew Knies was as a penalty killer. We saw how effective he was as a power play guy, and we saw how effective he was as a forechecker. He's just growing into his career right now. I'd be really excited if I was a Leaf fan.
So the $7.75 million annual value of his contract, 46.5 over 6 years. He's 22 years old. Everyone should be comfortable with those numbers because they did get Tavares at a pretty good price.
Well, that's a lot different. You know, Johnny's giving them a hometown discount. He's on the tail end of his career. Matthew Knies is just starting. Potentially the ability for a team to go out there and make let's say a predatory offer. I'm trying to use my words kindly. A predatory offer on a Group 2 free agency thing, which we saw last year with Edmonton and St. Louis, losing Holloway, losing Broberg. So I thought Toronto handled themselves really well. Here's the other thing. I helped negotiate Brady Tkachuk's contract when he was coming out of entry level. And Brady got a little over $8 million, and I thought Donnie Meehan and his people at Newport Sports did a great job in the negotiation. We tried to keep it in a relatively strong position for the team and for Brady long term, which we were able to do. But Knies is making less money than Brady at this kind of level, where you look at it and you see the cap going up to almost over $95 million this year. I think Toronto did a good job. I think Matthew Knies is a really good player. Do I think he's better than Brady Tkachuk? No, but he's not getting paid more than Brady Tkachuk either.
Yeah, and he's also 22 years old, so it's unlikely that we've even seen the best version of him yet. I mean, as a young man, he might not even be fully grown, and we can talk about that size, and we've talked about this all season long. The blueprint for how to win a Stanley Cup in today's game is out there right now, and it appears as though the Leafs are pointing themselves in the direction of being a little bit more physical, a little bit more size on the front end. Talk a little bit about that, about how they're announcing to the fan base, this is the direction we're headed.
Well, I think they tried to do that last summer too. I mean, when you really look at it, and you look at the additions they made on defense, whether it was Oliver Ekman-Larsson, whether it was Christopher Tanev, they were trying to get bigger, they were trying to get stronger, they were trying to get tougher. They did a lot of. Simon Benoit was one of the most improved players in the National Hockey League last year for the Toronto Maple Leafs on defense. I think Toronto's done a lot of good things. Was a playoff result exactly what you wanted? No, especially in games 5 and 7. We all know that. Bitter disappointments. But I'm really encouraged for where they are right now as an organization. I think they're taking the proper steps. Will it be easy to replace Mitchell Marner? No, it will not. It won't. It just won't. But I think they can do it by committee. And here's the one thing. This is for Leaf fans. I know Mitchell Marner's going someplace else. We all know that. I'm not sure he'll ever play with a better player than Austin Matthews. I just don't know if he will. He maybe Jack Eichel, if he goes to Vegas, will be better. Maybe Leo Carlsson, if he goes to Anaheim, might be better down the road. But I don't think any of them are better than Austin Matthews. And so it'll be interesting to see how Mitchell Marner does without Austin Matthews.
That's a very good point that doesn't get talked about enough. And from another angle, too, people are seeing the situation as like, how do we replace a 102-point guy? Well, the answer is probably you don't replace a 102-point guy. As you say, do it by committee. Knies is going to take some of those points. Matthews had a down year, so he's probably going to grab some of them back. If you do it by committee, it allows you to sign more pieces and bring them in a different situation. And speaking of Marner, we are hearing now talks of a potential sign and trade with the tampering Las Vegas Golden Knights. We've heard all of this talk about that. And, if they can salvage something out of this Marner situation, it would be tremendous win based on the way things have gone. They obviously didn't dump him last year at the trade deadline or anything because they were going for it. Now they're at risk of getting nothing back for him. If they could get anything for him, would that not be a tremendous win given the circumstance for the Leafs?
Absolutely agree. I think the way you phrased it is perfect, Kyle. Quite frankly, usually players get to unrestricted free agency and you don't get anything for them. Teams are predatory. They just wait it out. And then obviously You talk about tampering. I'm not saying Vegas tampered or any team in this league tampers, but people have discussions all the time. I mean, and for anybody to think that those discussions don't happen, whether it's with agents, whether it's with secondary people, back channeling, whatever you want to call it, there are communications that go on all the time in the National Hockey League. I don't know how they're going to legislate against that, because if you and I are working for different teams and we're sitting on a plane together on an 8-hour ride, what do you think we're going to do? Talk about, tiddlywinks? We're going to talk about hockey, and eventually we're going to talk about hockey players. That's just how it goes. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But I quite frankly, Mitchell gave good years of service to Toronto, and the Leaf fans enjoyed, I think, the way he played mostly, and he's going to move on. He's not the first player that's going to move on. He won't be the last player that's going to move on. What I think is great, though, John Tavares showed what kind of man he is. He showed his commitment to the organization. He showed his commitment to the community, and I think that's going to help. When we talk about doing it by committee, keeping John Tavares really helps the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, and we'll come back to John. I want to stay on Marner for a second, and let's speculate that he does end up in Las Vegas. It's quite clear he could be the missing piece they're looking for, and I'm very curious, how would Toronto Maple Leafs, how should they feel about something like that? Because just because he doesn't fit here, he could be the last piece of the puzzle of a return to the Stanley Cup for the Vegas.
I think he fit pretty well in Toronto, though, quite frankly. You get 102 points in a season, that's pretty good stuff.
But zero rings, Pierre. Zero rings. But that's how everything is measured in Toronto, and that's the point I'm making. Yeah. People are really down on a 102-point guy, and for a lot of reasons it's unfair. But that 102-point guy could go out to Vegas, be an 80-point guy, and be the last link in a cup run. He just could. He could just fit better.
Fair. Yeah, more than fair. The unfortunate.
So how would Leafs fans feel about seeing something like that?
They'd be hurt. I think they'd be hurt. I think they'd be bothered. I think Calgary fans, when they look at what happened with the Florida Panthers and they see Matthew Tkachuk down there and they see Sam Bennett down there, and neither one of those players had to be traded out of there. And I don't mean any disrespect to Brad Treliving. Brad Treliving was a general manager and traded both of those guys to the Florida Panthers. Florida Panthers aren't winning any Stanley Cups without Matthew Tkachuk or Sam Bennett. Sorry to tell you. They're just not. So, how the Calgary Flames fans feeling? Probably not so good. That's just part of the business. But here's what I would say. You got some really good players. And, we talk about all these different things with Toronto, the permutations and everything else. They want to change their DNA. I think that all started last summer. Bringing in Craig Berube, I think, helps change the DNA. Bringing in some of the physical guys in defense helps change the DNA. And I think they're going to bring in some bigger, tougher guys as this summer goes along, which will help change the DNA as well.
Well, let's stay in speculation land then, because the rumor in the sign and trade is that it would be Nicholas Waugh coming back from Vegas, and he is dead in line with that plan. Large guy, plays tough. That would probably be an incredible acquisition for the Leafs if the path they're on with Berube as the coach is indeed the game plan.
And Nick
what would he add to a Toronto Maple Leafs?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Nick can play winger center. That's really important too. But he's probably better at center. He's a big guy. He's over 6'4", probably 6'4.5". He's well over 200 pounds. Plays with a bit of an edge. But to me, the biggest thing about getting something back in return, getting John Tavares helps. You got Matthews in the one hole. Maybe Waugh and Tavares can do it by committee through the middle. That allows you to play Domi on the wing, where I think he's probably better. There's a lot of good stuff happening. It's just the silly seat and all the rumors that are going to kick up right now. It's going to be crazy. But if they could ever get Nick Waugh, that would be gigantic for Toronto.
It would be gigantic for them, and they would also, I believe, they were going to have quite a bit of cap space at this point.
They have significant cap space because of what happened with Knies and Tavares. They got significant cap space going forward. Yeah. So
they've really set themselves up well, and it's not often that you get on these shows and stuff and talk about 137th draft pick overall in the 5th round, but I do want to address someone that the Leafs drafted in the 5th round. A young man by the name of William Bell, a right winger, 6'4", 225 pounds. I have a 2-part question for you, Pierre. One, what are they feeding these kids now? Number 2 is, of course, is this yet another commentary on the direction they're headed? Another big power forward. He's only 18 years old. He's a long way from the show probably, but if they can accelerate his development at that kind of a frame, what is that saying to the fan base about where this team is headed?
They're prioritizing size and tenacity. He's a very effective forechecker. He's a kid. I watched him play at Shattuck St. Mary's, watched him play for the United States National Development Team. He's a kid from Minnetonka, Minnesota. He's going to the University of Notre Dame next year. He's going to play for Brock Sheehan there. Brock's a first-year head coach there. If Jeff Jackson had been there, I'd say he's definitely going to be groomed to be a one-dimensional player, and that's going to be a forechecker, a back checker, and a penalty killer, because that's just how Jeff coached. That's the type of player he produced at Notre Dame. Jeff's not there anymore. He retired last year after almost 30 years of coaching at Notre Dame. And so they bring in young Brock Sheehan, and Brock's an alum, graduated from Notre Dame in 2008. Brock's going to make a difference because I think they're going to try to groom this player to be a more complete player, not just a physical guy, not just a defensive guy, but to be an offensive guy. His numbers with the national team development program in the United States offensively, not very good. They're not. His offensive numbers aren't very good. But if you look at his numbers from Shattuck St. Mary's, where he was probably bigger and a bit stronger than the kids he was playing against, they're elite numbers. They're really good numbers. So this is going to be a total process for him to be labeled the right way, because right now he's labeled as a physical forechecker and a presence defensively. Now he's got to build the offensive side of the game. If you see this player in the NHL, it's probably not going to be within the next 3 years. It's going to take time for development.
Right. But, I mean, it's good for them to lay the groundwork, and if this is the direction the team's headed, have those pieces ready to come into the big show. And very quickly, let's touch on the other two draft picks. 64th overall, Linus Luke Korblar, Swedish player, also 6'4". He's a little lighter, but again, these are young men. They're filling out. There's all of this stuff. And 86th overall, Tyler Hopkins, a 6'1" center himself. So size is being prioritized here for certain. They didn't do too badly considering they didn't have a lot.
No. Mark Leach is a good friend of mine. He's a head amateur scout of the Toronto Maple Leafs. For years, he was in Detroit, then he was in Dallas. He played at St. Lawrence University. His brothers played in the National Hockey League, coached in the NHL. He comes from a big hockey family. I guarantee you, knowing Mark, they prioritize size, determination, and character with all their picks, because that's just his MO. That's how he does his business. So I would say that, again, you made the great point, I think, Kyle. The size factor does matter a lot, and Toronto clearly identified the need for size.
Yeah, and to your point that you just made with the tenacity and all of those, they're drafting character, and they're not just drafting. They have lots of guys with hands. They have lots of guys that can score goals. They have a great situation between the pipes. There's that internal thing, that internal monologue some players lack or don't have, and they're picking guys that seem to already show signs of it. And I think considering they didn't have the best selection of picks in the draft, I think they did okay for helping to build their farm system in their future.
Well, especially with this draft, this is not a knock. Every player that was drafted in this draft should be saluted and commended, and they should be very proud. But quite frankly, athletically, this was not one of the better drafts the National Hockey League has ever seen. Next year, a lot deeper. The year after that, deeper even again. This is not a draft from 2003. This is not a draft from 2015. This is not a draft from 2020. This is a little deeper in terms of not as much talent, maybe a little bit more character, if I can say it that way. So I think Toronto took advantage of the character issue of this draft, which is it's a high character draft, not nearly as much talent in this draft.
Yeah, and as you say, we're not going to have a consensus outcome on any of these players in the next 6 months. So it's important for the fan base to assess what they've done here, and they're laying groundwork to have a strong future, and I think they did pretty well. Let's quickly return to John Tavares and what his re-signing at. Listen, I listened to you and EJ last week right after he signed. The talk is all about what an incredible value they got him. He could have gotten a lot more money elsewhere, and it says so much about his commitment to this franchise, which goes back to, again, as you guys pointed out, the way he signed, the way he turned over that captaincy. Everything about him is he wants to win in Toronto. Talk about Johnny Tavares.
Well, first of all, I'm really excited for him and his family. Second of all, I'm thrilled to death for Leaf fans. Secondly, how many times can you find a second or third line center that's producing an almost a point a game average? That's really hard to find. Johnny had a great year last year, and I don't think that's going to dissipate. The truth is, though, I think they need more insulation down the middle. I think they'll get that. That'll keep him fresher for the playoffs. I think Austin will have a better season this year than what he had last year because he was dealing with so much physically. That helps Johnny. But I think the biggest thing is when guys see a guy like Tavares stay, Kyle, internally, it makes everybody feel better about the process of what's going on in Toronto. And I think that's a big part of what's going on in Toronto right now. You know, they talk about that DNA stuff, Brad Treliving. That's part of the DNA they want. They want guys to stay rather than guys that want to leave. Either you want to be part of the solution or you want to be part of the problem. And if you want to be part of the problem, move on. If you want to be part of the solution, you stay. And I think Johnny Tavares wants to be part of the solution.
Yeah, and again, this is a team where we were in full, not so much we, but the fan base as a whole was in full panic mode the way the season ended. I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this, but Edmonton suffered the same fate against Florida. They got wiped off the board in 2 games. This Toronto Maple Leafs team is very, very, very close. John Tavares recognized that, signed with the team, stayed with the team at what can only be described as a discount. And again, he'll make it back on so many in so many other ways in that city, especially if he can return them to glory. He will be, as you stated with EJ, he'll have the key to the city at that point. That commitment shows a lot to these young guys coming up in the development system, and probably the ability to attract free agents. And let's talk about that because they do have all this cap space. How would you use it in the offseason?
I would try to improve my forward position, and I'd try to get a puck-moving defenseman. I think you're really good with Stolarz in goal. And I'm not trying to open up a wound here. Anthony Stolar's injury in the Florida series definitely played a role. And this is not a knock on anything else that happened in the series. But I believe if Stolarz is healthy, they win game 3. And I think there's no looking back. If they're up 3-0 on Florida, they win that series going away. Once Florida found a way to break through in game 3 and make it a 2-1 series, and then they win game 4, everything's reeling for Toronto. It was almost a perfect storm for Florida. I felt terrible for the Leafs and their fan base. That being said, I would try to spend it on a forward, and I'd try to spend it on a puck-moving defenseman.
Would you be pursuing Brad Marchand?
I would definitely try to pursue Brad, but I think he's going to stay in Florida.
Yeah, it's a very, very tough place. Both him and Bennett, it seems as though they're staying there. They have a strong team. They're going to run it back next year. They're going to go into the playoffs for sure. It would be a very difficult situation for those guys to leave. So you have to really decide, I guess, as a, Trey Living, you have to, in the front office, how much of our energy and effort are we putting towards looking for a specific guy, or are they looking for a type of guy moving forward from here?
Well, Marchand's that type of guy, that type of guy.
But there's not many of them, right?
No, they're hard to find. But you try to get guys that have won before in their careers, whether they won in the NHL, whether they won in the American League, whether you try to find guys that have won. That's really an important. Every team I was ever around that was part of winning, they always found guys that were winners, that did know how to win, that were prepared to sacrifice to win. I think they'll do that. That's what everybody's talking about, they want to get tougher. They want to be this. They want, when Brad Treliving talked about, we're going to change our DNA a little bit. I think part of that is we're going to bring in guys that maybe don't have the biggest names, but we're going to bring in guys that have won before without those big names. I'm going to be interested to watch how they do this come July 1st, because I do think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch the Toronto Maple Leafs roster start to settle up as we go into next season.
It will be very interesting because they do have so many of the offensive pieces in place now too, and the pieces that they seem to be missing as much as anything, they may all fall into the category of the intangible things that you just spoke of. The guys that have already been all the way that can keep the room calm in the second round of the playoffs when you lose game 3, and instead of being up 3-0, you're still in Florida and you're all of a sudden only up 2-1. And that's obviously where that series fell apart for them. And those types of guys are the ones that can actually just remind everyone, hey guys, it's a game. It's just a single game. We're fine.
Well, I love the fact that you brought that up, Kyle, because it's near and dear to my heart. We don't win the Cups in Pittsburgh without Brian Trotier's influence. We had a lot of great players, but we didn't have a lot of great players that had ever won before. We had one, Joey Mullen, but nobody else. Brian Trottier had 4 Stanley Cups when he came to us. And Brian was amazing. The way he talked to the players, the way he kept guys calm, the way he kept the coaches calm sometimes. Brian was aces because of the experience, the trial, the tribulation. He'd been through it all with the Islanders. He comes to Pittsburgh as an older player, and it turns out unbelievably well. I'll say the same thing. I think Jonathan Toews, when he goes to Winnipeg, is going to do the very same thing for Winnipeg that Brian Trottier did for our Pittsburgh Penguin teams in 1991 and 1992. that's the kind of guy, and they're not easy to find, but Marchand would be one of those guys. Marchand's won 2 Stanley Cups, but he's also been to the Stanley Cup final in 2013 and 2019. People forget that. So he's got a wealth of experience when it comes to winning and being in key positions. And I think that matters. And I think that's one of the things they're going to try to add in Toronto.
Yeah, and even beyond the 2 Stanley Cups that he's won too, the number of times he's gotten through difficult moments in the playoffs, the type of moments we're talking about, those little differences between exiting in the second round or heading on to the third round are the type of intangibles that someone like him brings. Yep. Pierre, I want to thank you once again for joining me. I'm going to say goodbye to you right now, but I have a feeling I'm going to be seeing you again this week because come July 1st, it becomes absolute mayhem. That is, of course, tomorrow, and we are expecting a lot of action and the free agency signing and a lot from the Toronto Maple Leafs as well. So for now, that has been McGuire Mondays. My name is Kyle Andrew. Thanks for joining us on Toronto Sports Rush. I'm certain we'll see you again later this week, everyone.
Thanks, Kyle. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.